Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Real Deal. And I want to wish you all a happy Juneteenth. It is a good day, a day of celebration of something that went on for a long time in the United States that was strictly horrible. And it's good to remember this day. And a lot of people, well, let's just say this. There's still a lot of racists out there in the United States of America. There's racists all over the world. There is still slavery in many countries and many parts of the world. But very grateful that the United States of America does not have official slavery like it used to. So I'm going to give you the lowdown on slavery, how Juneteenth came to be, the war between the states, Civil War, whatever you want to call it. Down south, they call it the Great Federal Aggression. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit how Juneteenth came to be. But first, we have to start out with slavery in the United States of America. Now, before it became the United States of America, in the early 16th century, so this is when the Spanish had come here. And they were settled. The oldest city in America, in the USA, is St. Augustine, Florida. Beautiful city. A lot of history down there. But slaves came with them. That was 1526, where the first documented slave was in what would later become the United States of America. And it wasn't as bad until it started getting into the main transatlantic slave trade, which was mainly from the English colonies who came over here later on down the road. And that was 1619 when the transatlantic slave trade really took off. So in the beginning, the Spanish explorers, when they were coming here, they had slaves on their ships from Africa. And, they also brought them, like I said, to St. Augustine in the beginning, and Florida, all over Florida. But there was a privateer ship called the White Lion in 1619, and it landed in Jamestown, Virginia, and it brought 20 enslaved Africans. They were traded for goods, items, whatever, and that was the beginning of the slave trade in the United States of America. And they were basically, in the beginning, now a lot of people were religious back then and went by the laws of the Old Testament, to where if you had a slave after 7 years and he paid his debt, basically, he was freed. You gave him property, you gave him land. Basically, they were indentured servants. And a lot of the people in the very beginning, and I'm not justifying this, trust me, I don't like slavery no matter what, but a lot of people in the beginning did that. Some people took good care of their slaves and treated them like family. Some people treated them like property. And, you've got good and the bad. They were still slaves no matter what. They didn't have freedom. And back then, it was a little different, but it still was slavery. So according to what they would believe and read in the Old Testament, because back then the Old Testament was written a lot better than it is today, or what Christians call the Old Testament. It was written, now they've changed it so much. It's like every year there's a new version of the Bible coming out. And they break it down and misinterpret it, and it loses a lot of what it means. It loses a lot of meaning in the mistranslations. But back then, a lot of the people, after 7 years, they would set them free. They'd be like, here you go. Here's this. Here's that. And some of these guys that were free, that were former indentured servants, they did pretty well for themselves. And some of them would end up buying slaves. Because, trust me, slaves were not cheap. Only the rich people could own them. But some of these indentured servants got their freedom, and they ended up getting servants. A matter of fact, the first victim of the United States American Revolution was Crispus Attucks, who was a freed black man, an indentured servant. He earned his freedom, and he did quite well for himself in Boston and was doing pretty well until the British killed him. And that was not good. And a lot of people downplayed it because he was black, but a lot of people really liked him because he was a nice guy. And he did a lot for the community, and he never should have been killed. He was an innocent victim, and that set off the revolution. Just one of the many things that set it off, but he was one of the first victims. Got to remember that, because like I said, there's a lot of racism in this country. I see it every day. I see it a lot today, because Juneteenth to some should not be a federal holiday. It should be not a holiday. It's nothing at all. We're going to get to why it's a holiday. Now, in Virginia and the colonies, once they started settling in the mid-1600s, 1660, 1670, they started coming up with laws. And they came up with what they called a hereditary slavery law. And that was in Virginia. Virginia was one of the heavy-duty states that started this, and other states kind of followed. The hereditary slavery law made enslavement permanent, racial, and basically generational. So now, instead of freeing them, like a lot of people did, you are a slave for life. You are a slave for life, and there was nothing you can do about it. And that went on for years and years and years. And what that was called is chattel. Chattel is the word, Chattel, if I remember correctly, but it's pronounced chattel. Chattel slavery. And what chattel slavery did, and this was the American USA laws for the most part, what that did was that basically made you 100% slave for life. They could do whatever they want to. You were basically in their care. They could do whatever they want to. It was legal. Honestly, if they wanted to kill you, they wouldn't, because there was too much money involved. They could. And the law would have said, like, well, he had it coming. They were basically enslaved into human bondage. The person that owned you had you for life. You were his personal property. Anything that came out of him, like kids, that was their property. And enslaved individuals had no legal rights whatsoever under the chattel, and that's what most of the laws were. You had no freedom. You had nothing but slavery. You had no freedom. You had no legal rights. You could be bought, sold, traded, inherited, anything. All your children, permanent slavery. You were nothing but property, personal property, similar to like a cow. So if somebody owned a cow and a slave, both the same thing. Slave dropped dead, nobody cared. Even if he'd been beat to death, they didn't care. Legally, they could do it. It was property. And it was horrible. It was not just the men. There was a lot of women. What they would do is they would get the transatlantic trade going from Africa. You would have other African tribes capturing their opponents' tribes, because let's face it, people, even back then, all the tribes in Africa did not get along. Just like all the tribes and Native American tribes in the United States, they did not get along. They fought, they killed, they raped each other. It was not peace and love in the peace pipe like everybody tries to paint it out to be. So you would have tribes in West Africa capturing other tribes, because they're like, if I lose this battle, I'll be the slave. And they were selling them to a lot of countries, France, Britain, the Netherlands, Spain. They were any country that was coming over here was involved in the transatlantic slave trade. And it was horrible. And it was big business. Now, when you got here to America, you went up for auction. And when they bought you, and trust me, it wasn't cheap, you were basically subject to slavery for life. You didn't get paid for it. You were forced labor without wages, and they could do whatever they want to you. They could make you lift whatever they want. They could make you do whatever they wanted. It was awful. And then, of course, you had the bad part. I mean, the worst part. It was all bad, but you had the house slaves. And those were usually women. Every now and then there'd be a guy who was like kissed the master's butt enough to where he could get in there out of the field, and he'd do whatever the master said. You know, if he said, take this whip and go beat them guys, he'd do it. He'd do it. He was basically a capo. He'd do it because he wanted to save himself. But a lot of the women were subject to basically do what I say, or you're going to be out there picking crops. And that involves sex. And, you know, they'd say, well, they raped him. I guess you could say it was rape, but it was consensual, but the only reason they did it is because if they didn't, they would have been probably killed, beat, or out there, and it was the lesser of two evils in their eyes. And it's understandable, and it's horrible, and it's disgusting, and we have many people that, you know, there's no saying that every black person in America has a little white blood in them from the slavery days, unless you came over here straight from Africa recently. And I kind of believe it because there was a lot of nasty stuff that went on. Most of this stuff was documented. These guys would brag about it. They didn't care. There was property. You had to do what we say. It was horrible. It was horrible. And let me just tell you this too. A lot of people talk about slavery in the South, but they don't understand. The slavery down south was bad. The big plantations, the money, the rich folks. There was slavery in the North too. Don't let them fool you. Most of the ships that brought the slaves into the United States of America would bring them into the ports in Delaware and Boston and, well, New Amsterdam back then, but New York City. They would be all in the North, a lot in Virginia, you know. So the North had a lot to do with it. There were laws out there for slavery for the North. If a slave escaped, there were laws on the books that even if they made it all the way up to Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, they could still be sent back down there. And the person turning him in got a little bit of money for it, $20, which is about $800 today. That's a lot of freaking money. So you can't tell me that people wouldn't do that. The Underground Railroad was out there. A lot of people tried to free the slaves during the war and before that, and that was a little rough. A lot of those people died. A lot of the slaves died. A lot of them got caught and sent back down there, and when they got caught, you know it wasn't good. They would do whatever they could to keep them from running away. These people wore shackles. They didn't get anything, and we had a lot of our forefathers, the founding fathers. Many of them had slaves. And I'm going to talk about that to you one of these days when get a little closer to the 250th birthday, because we glorify some of the wrong people in this country. We build up way too much, people. But anyway, getting back to this, the slave trade was horrific. It was everywhere, and it had been going on for a long time. You'll hear people say the North didn't have slaves, the North didn't do this, the North didn't do that, the North was fighting. The North was fighting the South. Slavery was just a small part of the Civil War, people. Slavery was not even the main issue. There was a lot more to it than that. It was basically economic because the North got all the money. And when you had a Northern president like Lincoln get elected, they knew all the money and all the business and all the factories and stuff would remain up north. That's why the South was a little more mad, because there was still slavery when Lincoln got in there. Lincoln didn't try to pass the Emancipation Proclamation till 1863, people. Now, don't you think if he was really against slavery and wanted it done, he would have put it out there on the very first day? Yeah, that would have been my first thing. It was like, slavery's outlawed, people. You got a problem with that? Bring it on. But no, he didn't. He waited a few years. Now, I'm not going to get into the Lincoln thing today. Lincoln did a lot of bad things. He violated the Constitution. We got all these people up there, but they praise him. They praise him and stuff, and that's fine. But if you know the real truth about some of these people, you don't look at them the same way anymore. Now, there were many companies in the United States of America that are still in existence today that I don't deal with. People like Wells Fargo and many others, because they made their money off of the slave trade. U.S. Bank, they started with nothing, started bartering and lending money to people. They'd give them slaves as collateral, saying if I don't make my payment, you can take my slave, because they could take that, turn around and sell it for $5,000, which was a lot of freaking money back then. I ain't exaggerating either. This is the real deal. You know me. I'm telling you the truth. And it was horrible. And these companies are still here today. That's why I don't deal with them. One of these days I'll mention the whole list of them. There's a lot. It's going to take me a while to get through. And so in 1861, on April 12th, the war between the states, the Civil War, whatever you want to call it, Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter down there in South Carolina. The war began. Now, on April 9th of 1865, and this is the war that killed more Americans than all the other wars combined, basically, General Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. Here's a fun fact for you. General Grant owned a slave. When he was called upon to be the U.S. general, they told him, you need to get rid of your slave, dude. And he's like, he was very cheap. He wasn't a good person either, I'll tell you what. He was a crook. Teapot Dome scandal, look it up. Anyway, so he said he got rid of the slave and freed them, but documents show that he basically put the slave in the name of his friend. So basically his friend had control of the slave, but it was still Grant's. Yeah, a little sketchy situation there. Now, the last Confederate conflict, the war was over, but the last Confederate conflict, because a lot of people didn't know the war was over. It's not like today where you got instant communication. Back then it was telegrams and, word of mouth and stuff. But the last Confederate command surrendered on May 26 in 1865, basically formally ending the conflict. Now, Lincoln was shot right after the official surrender, but like I said, people kept fighting. They didn't know what was going on, and it went on for a little bit, but a lot of places didn't know about it, so it continued, and it officially was over, but there were still people fighting, and there was still slavery. Now, in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was passed by Lincoln. And it said more than 3 million people enslaved in America were allowed, in the Confederate States, I should say, they were allowed to be free. But the chattel slavery remained legal. And people don't know this stuff. This is Emancipation Proclamation. They weren't all free. The chattel slavery, which I talked about earlier, you were in bondage, you were property, that remained legal in the border states that was loyal to the Union. Let me say that again. Chattel slavery remained legal in border states that were loyal to the Union. So those states were Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and what's now West Virginia, which was Virginia then. And it was not abolished in the United States, that slavery, in those states, until the 13th Amendment. Stop and wrap your head around that, people. So you always hear how Lincoln freed the slaves. No, because the Confederate states didn't have to listen to him because they didn't honor the Constitution, because they were no longer a part of the United States of America. So basically, he's saying the Confederate States have to give away these slaves, and they're like, no, we don't. We don't have to listen to you. And they kept fighting the war. And meanwhile, these other states I just mentioned, it was okay for them. It was okay for them. I'm like, see, people, you don't know the real history of things that goes on. That's what I'm here for, to educate you, to teach you this stuff. Because they won't teach you this stuff in the schools. And a lot of this stuff you find on the internet is very twisted and distorted. And because to the victors goes the spoils. So they rewrite it and retell it the way they want to. And they'll exaggerate it to make themselves look good. Now, the 13th Amendment did not come out until the end of 1865, way after the war was over, way after everything else. And it's the part of the Constitution that formally abolished slavery. But the words slavery and slave are never mentioned in the Constitution. And the 13th Amendment talks about all this stuff. You've got Article 1, Section 2, which regards the apportionment of representation in the House of Representatives, determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians. So, I mean, it's not what you think it is. It never says slaves, but it's like, we knew what it meant. They knew what it meant. It said held to service or labor. So, it basically was saying the slaves were free. Now, here's the kicker. The Emancipation Proclamation only freed the slaves for the Confederates. The slave states, the states I mentioned earlier, with the chattel slavery, those states, slavery was still legal. And the North didn't have any rules against it. Each state might have their own, but there was no federal rule against it. And a lot of the states, like I said, they could send them back, and they were not allowed to live freely. And the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free the slaves in the North. So let's say you lived in Indiana and had some slaves. There was no state law against it, so it was legitimate. So they didn't get freed until the 13th Amendment. There's a lot people don't know about the slavery of this country. And even then, a lot of the slaves, when they were freed, had nowhere to go. Where did they go? They didn't have anything. A lot of them stuck around. Kept working for the man. Here's a little kicker, too. The United States White House, for all you people that, want to praise certain people, and like back in the day, certain founding fathers, the White House was built with predominantly slave labor. They had to work next to, there was black men that were freed, black men, indentured servants formerly. They got paid a little bit, but they didn't get paid as much as the white people that were working next to them. So you got these slaves out there working for free, watching these other guys getting paid, And people try to justify the slaves saying, well, they got free room and board. They lived in a freaking shack. They didn't even have tar paper back then. They lived in a freaking shack, man, in a hut, probably just like they did in Africa. They slept on floors. They slept on straw. They didn't have beds. They didn't have nothing. They try to turn it around today to make it look good, like, oh, look at this, look at that. No, they didn't treat most of these people good at all, man. And you know why most black people eat a lot of pork and crappy food like that? Is because that's all they were given back then. So they kind of got used to it. It's the truth, people. They would take the pig and whatever they didn't eat. No, we don't eat the pig nuts. Here, you can have them. Pig ears, no, we don't have. Pig snout, you can have that. They'd give it to them. They would give them the crap food that they wouldn't eat. That's the truth. Because they didn't care. And much like today, a lot of people don't care. And that's sad. People just are heartless. And like I said, people don't want to know the real history. They don't like to hear the real history. I can tell you more in 30, 40 minutes than you'll ever learn from Google or something. And all you'll do is read a sentence. It's like, well, that's not true. I read it on Google. I read it on this website. Oh, yeah, they just don't give those to anybody. And, yeah, they just don't give podcasts to anybody either. But why would I lie? What do I get out of all this? I'm doing this for free. I'm doing this to educate. I'm doing this to wake minds up, help people. I want y'all to know what's going on. That's why I do it. And, for the record, I appreciate people that want to do multi-podcasts with me and sit in with me. I appreciate that. But I like doing things on my own like this. That's how I've always been. So, getting back to the origin of Juneteenth. So, it was May. There were still battles going on. Finally, they're like, oh, okay. There were still slaves going on. Most of the slaves were like, because the Emancipation Proclamation did kick in after the North won, but it still wasn't legal. But there was still a lot of slaves. And there was 250,000 slaves still in Texas. Now, most of these places west of the Mississippi, didn't know about the end of the war, like in Texas. They didn't know about it. And so basically what happened was a major general, his name was Gordon Granger, he had General Order Number 3, and they rode into Texas, Galveston, Texas, on June 19th, and they enforced the edict that the state residents, the slaves, were finally free, and that slavery had been abolished in the Confederate States, and that the war was over. And they told them, basically, the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the Orders of the United States, all slaves are free. And a lot of the slaves were like shocked. A lot of them shocked. They didn't know what to do. Some of them started partying. Some of them started praying. And they celebrated that day. June 19th, 1865. You're talking 250,000 slaves didn't know about it. What if the Major General hadn't told them? They could have been doing this for years, and nobody would have told them about it. Not to mention, you don't know how long some of these people were enslaved. So, the following year, in 1866, was the official first celebration. That's how long this has been going on. Texas is celebrated every year. And what they would do is they would pray, and they would sing spirituals. Now, here's the thing about black folks with their Christianity when they embraced it. What they did is they came from Africa. They had their own religions and beliefs. They came here, and they realized, and this is sad, but they started getting onto Christianity because it was forced on them. But they also realized, because most of these people were Christians, you don't work on Sunday. So they're like, yeah, I'll worship this Jesus guy. I mean, Jesus? Yeah, because they got Saturday or Sundays off. And they were pretty grateful for that because there was hardly any, you can't really find any documentation of any Jewish slave owners. Otherwise, they would have got Friday to Saturday off. And that didn't happen. Most of your slave owners were white Southern boys from England, France, Ireland, a lot of them. Didn't see a lot of Jews that owned slaves. Probably none of them did because they know what it's like to be a slave. Anyway, so they would celebrate. They'd sing prayers to spirituals, everything like that. And they claimed dedicated spaces to celebrate Juneteenth. They made it a big holiday. And they had a park established in Houston. It was the first park for emancipation. That's what it's called in 1872. So 7 years after this, they went back there and they built this park. And you can say what you want about Texas. I like Texas. People down there are nice and friendly. And I have no problem with the South. What I like about the South is they don't try to downplay what happened. They tell you the truth. They're like, we didn't do it. Our forefathers did. We're not proud of it. But here's what happened so it'll never happen again. And I respect them for that. And that's how Texas is. Texas is like, you know what? We were wrong. It wasn't us. It was our forefathers. We didn't do it. But we're not going to let it happen again, and we're going to take care of you. So you had a lot of the black Texans, the black freed slaves down there in Texas, eventually started moving around. And they go to where people say, why are you celebrating this? And they tell you, this is a holiday for us, man. And they did this all the time. And Texas kept celebrating it. Other states started picking up on it. And eventually it went all across America for the most part. And black folks realize what it is. They have their own flag. They have their own national anthem for it. They sing their songs. They have the what's that unofficial black national anthem? Lift Every Voice, Sing. I can't remember if that's the exact title of it, but that's basically what it says. That's their national anthem. And this has been going on for a long time. They have parades. They party. I mean, I'd party too. I celebrate my people's holidays. We don't forget. And other people mock us for it. They'll say, you guys have a lot of holidays. I'm like, you guys? Our stuff is documented. And just like June 19th, it's documented. Every black man needs to celebrate it, and the white man needs to honor them for it. There's not a problem with it, man. Now in 1980, Texas made it a state holiday. And other states started following suit right after that. They were like, yeah, okay, let's do that. You had a lot of states, a lot of their southern states, because like I said, they're not proud of what happened. You know, I'm sure some people are. I know people up north that are proud of it. But you know, and then in 2021, it was made a federal holiday. And it was the first new federal holiday we've had in the USA since MLK Day, Martin Luther King Day. That was 1983. And, you know, it was, I have no problem with it. I think it's great. And I think we need to honor it. I think, you know, black people went through a lot of hell. You know, I think some of them still go through a lot of hell today with racism. It's still out there. Don't tell me it's not. I see on Facebook today, I'm seeing posts where people are going off on the holiday saying just horrible stuff. And I'm like, why would you be upset with this? What's it do to you? And they're like, well, we don't do this enough. We don't do this. Well, why don't they celebrate Easter like this? I'm like, okay, they do. You know, I mean, come on, people. And not everybody celebrates Easter because not everybody's a Christian, right? But I know a lot of people that aren't Christians that still celebrate Easter because they give stuff to their kids from the Easter Bunny and stuff because other kids see it. And they see it, they get jealous, you know? So I don't have a problem with this holiday. I'm glad they made it. But there's a lot of people that do. And I see a lot of people getting upset. It's Pride Month. And you see the rainbow flag everywhere. And I see a lot of people get upset with that. And, you know, to each their own. But the people that defend the pride flag, I always point out to them, you know, when they say, well, we celebrate everything. We celebrate heritage and stuff. I'm like, did you celebrate Jewish Heritage Month? You don't have a problem getting drunk on St. Patrick's Day. None of you know what Cinco de Mayo is about. I see these people doing this. But you don't mind putting on the sombrero, eating a taco, and getting drunk. But you don't honor certain things. And they said, well, you know, it's Pride Month. And I said, that's true, but it's Juneteenth. Where's the Juneteenth flag? And they'll tell me there isn't one. I'm like, yeah, there is. This flag's been around for about, 30, 40 years now. I believe it was made in the late 80s. Somebody came up with it. It's a nice flag. A simple flag, a nice flag. Some have 1865 on it. Some don't. But I think it's something major that we all need to remember. This is a major event, people. When you stop and think about what our country went through, how many thousands of people died, and the freedom that they fought and died for these people. And I've seen in museums and stuff letters from people in the North where they'll point out, they get it down south, they'll put it in their museums and say, see, it wasn't just us. You'll see a guy in Pennsylvania dropping the N-word in there, you know, saying, I don't like fighting for these N-words. And I'm like, ouch. But it's real. And the racism's still there today. And it's sad. It doesn't have to be like that, but I see it every day. And I have no problem with Juneteenth, and I hope none of y'all have a problem with it. I hope I helped open your minds up a little bit, educated y'all. You ever have a question, ask me, man. That's what I'm here for. And I'll tell you the straight up honest truth. Slavery was in America for a long time, people. I mean, you stop and think about it. It was a couple, 250 years. That's a long time. And even after the slaves were free, some of them still hung on and were slaves. Some of the slave owners didn't tell anybody about it. I'm sure of that. I mean, again, a lot of our founding fathers owned slaves. I mentioned that the other day, and somebody mentioned to me that just because it's immoral now doesn't mean that it was immoral then. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, are you telling me that it was okay to own slaves? Well, not now, but back then it wasn't a big deal. I'm like, yuck. Yuck. I wouldn't want to own a slave. I wouldn't want to own a human being. No. And I'm just blown away by some people that say things like that. When they'll sit there and say, well, we need to celebrate this, celebrate that. Well, they'll sit there and they'll say things like, well, the blacks have their own month. my people don't have their own month. I'm like, well, you're white. Every day is your month. You know what I mean? You guys, the reason they put it aside is to say, hey, man, let's honor these people. These people were shat on by the United States. They were shat on by their own people. I mean, it was horrific. And people don't want to remember that. And then they'll blame all the crime out there is on the blacks. The blacks do this. I see it every day. The crime report, this, that, and the other. It's like always. Racism is still here, people. And it's not going away. Thankfully, there's some wise people, caring people, loving people that don't look at it some way. If somebody broke into my house and it was a black man, I don't dislike him because he's a black man. I dislike him because he's a thief. If somebody was mean to my child and it was a black man or a black child, I'm not going to sit there and say anything about his color. I'm going to say something about him and what he did. But too many people make it all about the color, the race. They always have to point that out. Why? Makes them feel better about themselves. They'll sit there. I see these people say, you know, I'm not a racist. And it's like, no, you're not a racist on the outside. Deep down inside, when you live in a 99% white community and you have no black friends and you don't have anything to do with black people and you only go into these cities that have predominantly white neighborhoods, and, you know, don't tell me you're not a racist. Deep down inside in your mind, you're a racist. I supported the Black Lives Matter. I know a woman was jogging through a town, 99%, it's probably 99.5% white community, and she was jogging in it, real sweetheart. I love her, nice person. And she was jogging. She's in good shape. She does all this. And she was going through the town where they were having their little protest where they do it once a week for an hour a week to change the world. But anyway, they were out there with the Black Lives Matter sign, and she pointed out, she's like, they knew her, they didn't like her because she's conservative. And she goes to them, she's like, where are the black lives in this town? They're like, we have plenty of them. And she's like, what do? Count them? Because they probably do. And that's their thing. That's how they try to justify things. Or they'll add somebody on Facebook, you know, they'll follow Kamala Harris. Well, she's a person of color. Yeah, okay, you're still a racist because that's why you're following her, to try to prove that you're not a racist. I find that a lot of racists come from both sides of the table. It's just the people on the right are a little bit more open about it. It's not good, but let's not forget the party of the Democrats. Who started the Ku Klux Klan, people? General Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, a general of the Confederate Army in Tennessee, started the KKK in Pulaski, Tennessee, and he was a big slave trader. And he was probably mad because the slaves were freed now. He lost a lot of money. So what did they do? They started messing and harassing the free black man and the KKK. And it went on and on from there. So don't try to act like the left is so high and mighty and perfect and sticks up for the brothers and sisters, because they could care less. I don't like hypocrites. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. I hope you enjoyed today's talk. I hope you learned a lot. And I hope you'll honor and respect Juneteenth. You don't have to go out and have a party or fly the flag or anything like that, but respect it. Don't go on Facebook and make comments. I saw one comment said it was a racist-ass holiday. And I said, what's racist about it? Well, it's just for the blacks. I'm like, no, it's honoring them. It's honoring the day they were freed. They were actually finally freed from slavery. And then they try to say, well, the Irish people were slaves. These people were slaves. Yes, are you trying to say that it's okay? Because one group is slaves, it's okay to enslave another group? No. Y'all just shut up, know your history, learn your history, and just honor it. Just respect it. It's not that hard, people. It's not that hard to be a good human being, okay? I hope you learned a lot today. Take it with you. Peace and love. Happy Juneteenth.